It's Sunday, July 12, 2026. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism on Substack at The Anthony Davis. Our guest today is a celebrated writer and commentator of American culture and politics. He's the author of several books, including American Rule and The Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. Jared Yates Sexton, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Anthony, my friend, always a joy.
So we haven't seen each other for a few months, and I always say that, you know, when we kind of come back to conversations with you, I almost feel like we're picking up from where we left off, and there's, you know, often a firestorm has happened in between our meetups. Obviously, we've had the disastrous celebrations of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Donald Trump stamped his name all over it, made it more about him than about the country, and failed to put politics to one side. In fact, if anything, kind of rammed it down people's throats more than ever. We saw Patriot Front, 400 white nationalists marching on D.C. and elsewhere. The images of what was supposed to be a great celebration have ricocheted around the world as really a disaster. I mean, even the firework display was, I mean, it was just a mess, and warranted air quality warnings for the next few days. It's almost as if Mother Nature, with the thunderstorms and the smoke, is telling us something about this guy. So in this moment, you know, you wrote about the coming crisis. You predicted correctly. We are in that crisis. As far as I can see, it's far worse for Americans than you predicted and any of us predicted. So the midterms are getting closer every day. And are you expecting things to kind of roll out normally, or you're expecting a kind of crescendo of Trumpism in November?
You know, Anthony, it's funny, with the 250th anniversary, I was researching ancient Rome for the Midnight Kingdom, and near the end of the empire, it became a time of signs and symbols and portents of doom. And I couldn't help but watch all of it, and I'm not a superstitious person, but I thought that it was metaphorically dead on. And what we basically watched at this time was an unraveling of the United States through pageantry and messaging. I mean, this country is in decline. The American empire is on the downslope. We might have very well seen a mortal blow dealt with the disastrous and illegal war on Iran. And I think what we watched on July 4th was sort of a manic, self-destructive bender, more or less. You know, I think it was apropos that the sky over Washington, D.C. was more or less set on fire, and the people underneath were left to scurry away from the elements and also unable to see any of the pageantry, while the President of the United States of America fell asleep during one of the most massive and overwhelming fireworks shows of all time. Yeah. So personally, for me, I walked away with this, not just the symbolic nature of it, but also the messaging that came around it. And it became very clear, I want to say it was by 10 a.m., it became very clear that this was the rollout and the launching of the Trump administration and the far right's war against emerging leftism in the United States of America. Every single speech was equating the greatness, supposed greatness of the United States with Donald Trump. You would have thought that he would have flown the Wright brothers' plane by the afternoon. And eventually, at some point or another, it became abundantly clear that going into the midterms, whether or not they're going to be free and fair or even held at all, that we are starting to look at an existential battle between the far right and the left, which anybody who has studied authoritarian cycles, they understand that that's the next evolution of this thing. It's not just going to be liberals versus the right, because eventually at some point or another, the mix gets more complicated. And the messaging, the fear of communism, the fear of socialism, and personally, because I'm a sicko, I watched way too much C-SPAN on July 4th. Yeah. And every single caller was a confused, terrified Trump supporter who believed that the country was falling into the jaws of full out, they described it as fascist communism, which is an incredible historical take. So what I walked away with was both that symbolic enjoyment of watching this thing come unravel because it needs to, but also the understanding that the political environment is about to change.
I felt similar to you, but I also am starting to feel some positive energy because the corruption is so overt and everything that Trump touches is a disaster. I mean, all of those events were just awful, from the state fair to, I mean, all of it. It was just, and we heard that from Republicans visiting as well. They were like, this isn't kind of what I was expecting. But I get a sense that because all of these symbolic events, such as, him taking a 747 from Qatar and painting it in American colors and, claiming that, America needs to have the best plane on the tarmac. I mean, he wants the best plane. It's nothing to do with America. There's nothing wrong with the old planes. But the point is that because the corruption is so overt, there is almost an organic separation of voters who are like, this is even too much for me. And I feel a groundswell of movement away from this childish dictator.
I couldn't agree more. I'm more hopeful than I've ever been in my entire life.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Anthony, it's funny. We've been talking for years, and I know who I am and I know what I represent. I understand that when I talk to people, I come off almost as a prophet of doom, talking about how bad things are or how bad things are going to be. Yeah. And I want to level with people. Things are very bad. And they're going to get worse. There's going to be a lot of tension. There's going to be a lot of tragedy. There's already been an incredible amount of bloodshed over the past 10 years and even before that. But what I'm seeing right now is something that for someone like me is incredibly hopeful, which is the veneer of respectability and the veneer of American mythology. It has to die in order for something to get better. And we are incredibly lucky. I think it was apropos that Donald Trump is president of the United States of America at the 250th anniversary, because it makes it clear the problems, the contradictions at the heart of the so-called American experiment. This is what has always been happening underneath the surface, underneath star-spangled veneers and all of this mythology. And we're at a point now where the contradictions can't be hidden. Because you can tell people we're in the golden age. You can tell people that America is more powerful than it's ever been. When people go out and they buy groceries, when people go out and they fill up their cars at the gas station, when they're not able to pay for their mortgages or not even able to afford a house in the first place, when people are defaulting on their energy bills, when they're defaulting on their credit card bills, which, by the way, is happening at a historic level.
Yes.
There's no papering over that. And really, anything that comes from Trump is an expression of vulture capitalism. And this is not about sustainability. It's not about growth. It's about plunder. And basically, we're at the stage, more or less, it's a bunch of, thieves stealing copper wiring out of the walls at this point.
Right.
And eventually,
out of the bridge is the analogy that I think of, because the bridge is being, we need the bridge to be held up. Right. And as the copper wire is stolen, and this is a reference to actual real stuff that goes on, that the bridge is in danger of collapsing.
Yeah, there's no maintaining this illusion. And I think what we're finally seeing, everything from Iran to living conditions, you name it, as those things get worse and as they become more obvious, the comfort that Americans feel is starting to fall by the wayside. And so again, anyone who studies history, they understand that paradigm changes don't happen when people are comfortable. When profit is up, when living conditions are growing, people become complacent, which is how you arrive at a place like this. But as things get worse and as people get more uncomfortable, you look at any poll right now, and it's very obvious that the vast majority, a supermajority of Americans do not agree with the trajectory of the country right now, which means not only are they going to look for alternatives, but they themselves are going to seek to, make that discomfort go away. And so if you take a look at any country that has gone in the trajectory of the United States of America, eventually what happens is there is a sea change. The question now is, what will that sea change be? Are we going to get worse, or are we going to try something that actually alleviates the suffering? And that's the question at the moment. And again, I'm more hopeful than I've ever been. And I know that seems contradictory to some people because things are getting worse. But in a country like this, particularly an empire, an hegemon that has determined all of world history in the modern era, that means that something is about to change, which means that the people who feel discomfort, the people who are disgusted by this, are going to start antagonizing for that change. So that groundswell of energy you're talking about, I absolutely sense it. I don't have a conversation with anyone that isn't radically different from a conversation that I've had with them decades prior.
The wheels are coming off, I think is probably a good way to describe it. And everybody can see that. You know, Trump talks about the nation being richer than ever, but he's talking about himself. He has never been so rich. He made $2.2 billion. And that's, you know, courtesy of his tax returns. I mean, we are in unprecedented times regarding the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. The cult of Trump, and it is, of course, we should remind people that it is a cult, and it goes beyond a cult of personality. I mean, this is an actual cult. Mm-hmm. There are a percentage of those people whose minds will simply not be changed, and we saw some of them being interviewed at the American State Fair, and you know, they were like, "I'll just do anything for Donald Trump. I'm here for him." You know, it was, and those people I think you just have to set to one side, but they are not the majority, and the majority, as we know, when polled nationally in the U.S., is far more progressive and far more liberal-minded than even maybe the way that they vote. So is there a disconnect? Because this is something I've been thrashing out recently, that there's a disconnect between what Trump represents and what the people represent. And actually the people are far more connected than they might realize. Because when you talk to people one-on-one, people tend to have the same values and ideals, whatever their politics. It's about being able to look after their families and be able to afford healthcare and all of those things. It's only when you thrust party politics into the equation do they become extremely tribal. But I'm starting to see the kind of them and us being Trump and the super rich and everyone else. But how will that play out at the ballot box?
I couldn't agree more. In my organizing work, one of the things that I teach is that we have to move away from red versus blue politics. And that's not to say that the Republican Party isn't fascist or that the Democrats are anywhere near as authoritarian as the Republican Party. We're talking about talking points. And more or less, red versus blue politics, it's a lot of very specially designed. And by the way, people make millions of dollars creating these storylines, right? Instead of talking about wealth inequality or affordability, we're talking about, can trans kids play in the same league? You know, we're talking about bathrooms. We're talking about these issues that are specifically decided upon in order to divide up the electorate. And that's class politics. It's always worked this way. It's not just a U.S. phenomenon. This has been a phenomenon in the entire history of representative politics. But when you move away from that, Anthony, what you actually find is there's a supermajority that ranges, depending upon the poll, between 60 and 80% of the populace. And here's the thing in all of it. That 60 to 80% is largely not represented. The Republican Party, of course, is a front, a PR front, and a manipulative front with all of right-wing corporate media that stands up for both the wealth class and the oligarchical classes. These are the ones who, of course, have historic wealth. And the Democratic Party largely has worked hand in hand with a lot of their billionaire donors and a lot of their corporate donors. So what do we not see? We don't see a debate about actual issues that people care about. And you're starting to see the numbers sway in a way that I never thought possible. Issues that used to be 50-50 or 45-45 have completely moved on the other end of the scale. So eventually what happens is that we have a paradigm shift. The Overton window kind of moves. The closest thing that I've ever seen to this time period is what took place during the progressive era at the beginning of the 20th century, in which we had robber barons who had historic wealth and that they had corrupted the entirety of representative government. Eventually the people stood up and, through different groups, some went after child labor, some went after suffrage, all of these sort of things. They said, we do not have a representation right now. So where the paradigm is going to shift, it's funny that everyone thinks the right wing is this homogenous group. A vast majority of MAGA has started to resent and oppose Trump. There's a reason why his support has absolutely cratered at this point. But it's not that they're going to suddenly vote Democrat and become liberals. They're being conditioned right now by people like Tucker Carlson to become more and more fascist. So it becomes clear what direction they're going to take. And matter of fact, there's even the readily available and readily apparent stab in the back. Why did Trump carry out the Iran war, which is unpopular with everyone? Oh, the Jews made him do it. And that creates a fascist narrative for people to actually move further to the right. Meanwhile, the Democratic base, which has been frustrated with the Democratic Party now for years, is starting to move towards the left. So we're seeing a stress test within the Democratic Party, and the base really has no material incentives to continue with the party unless it changes and represents. So my assumption at this point is over the next few years, we're going to see the issues change. We're going to see the positions change. And either we're going to see something like the progressive era in which the Democratic and Republican Party, all of them became progressives, or we're going to move away from these parties, move towards more fascism, and possibly see the Democratic Party go the way of the Whigs, which refused to fight against slavery with the Democratic Party, of course, in the 19th century. So I think we're in for a major paradigm shift. And I think this is going to reveal a lot more opportunities and a lot more, a larger window for change. The question is whether or not it's going to be able to succeed in the face of the fascists, who again are moving further and further to the right and more anti-democratic.
The timing is interesting because it was exactly 250 years ago that America declared independence from a king. And here we are 250 years later about to declare independence from a king. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, these things are not by accident. And I've always believed that history is cyclical, like fashion and other things. So this king has presented himself. He has declared that he wants to be king. He said, well, maybe people want a dictator. He's posed these questions. He's given himself the plane and the gold, the gold edging in the Oval Office, which looks like a palace now, which is exactly what the White House was never supposed to be as the people's house. And yet it can only push people away because invariably his supporters have been working class Americans. Mm-hmm. And it must disgust them. There comes a point, I guess, you know more about American culture than I do. Certainly where I'm from, we don't really care for the super rich. I mean, it makes us feel very uncomfortable, and we don't want them to have all of that wealth. And this has been a battle with the British royal family and the people for years. But in America, I think with the American dream and everything, you cut people a little more slack to be wealthy. But beyond wealthy, when everybody else is struggling, that there is a biting point, isn't there?
Absolutely. And going back to the robber baron age, with all these industrialists, who, by the way, Anthony, just a historical note, eventually sided with the fascists during, the Great Depression and then World War II. Again, history repeating and rhyming. At least that group, they realized at some point that their wealth and their power was so off-putting that they needed to start giving away to charity and foundations and museums and universities. Right. And by the way, creating institutes, right? These foundations that would help people. Our current class of oligarchs are not interested in any of that. In fact, we've been dealt an incredible gift that the oligarchs, the millionaires, and now trillionaire that we are dealing with, they're so off-putting and they are so focused on their own agendas. And what are their agendas? Let's go ahead and name them. It's living forever. It's eugenicist projects. It's literally killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people before this whole thing is done by cutting off any sort of aid around the world. Yes. By the way, they just created a crisis with the Iran situation. We haven't even seen the full consequences of that. No. We have an energy and economic crisis coming. On top of that, their one product that they're behind, AI, is a bubble that is about to pop at any given moment. So what has actually occurred here? It's a failure of not just imagination, but it's also a failure of public relations. They do not understand how much they are hated. And for me, I come from a very, very poor family in rural Indiana. And almost to a person, whenever I'm with a working class person, even somebody that I would sit down with who is wearing a Make America Great Again hat, when you actually talk to them, what the expressions always are is a distrust and a hatred for the financial elites. If you get rid of the red versus blue framing, almost to a person, if you're like, and for me, it's always been like, oh, Joe Biden did this. And I say, I have my problems with Joe Biden. I have my problems with the Democratic Party. The next thing you see is they're like, yeah, by the way, I think Donald Trump is full of it. I kind of know that. There's an instinctual understanding of what is going on, even though a lot of people can't articulate what is actually happening. But as these contradictions get worse, and by the way, as corruption grows, you brought up the White House. I don't have the sentimentality for the White House that everybody does. You know, this is a house that was built by slaves, and some of the worst war crimes that have ever been committed were cooked up there and executed there.
Yeah.
But the symbology of it is incredible because they can't help themselves. I always try and tell people the worst thing that could ever happen to Donald Trump is to actually get elected. His power and his influence was always by being an outsider and saying, I would take care of this, I would take care of this.
Right. He's a troll.
He's a troll.
Yeah.
And yes, he's been able to enrich himself, you know, and enrich his family over and over again, which, by the way, the right wing is disgusted by too. But his sort of performance, and by the way, this is a man who is declining by the day. This is a person who is literally like degenerating in front of us by the hour.
Yes.
This performance and the lies and the failures. And you look back at 2020, Anthony, it feels like an ancient time at this point.
Right.
What happened in 2020, particularly around the COVID situation, is people rose up, and it wasn't just because of George Floyd. It was because it was obvious that the people who had all of the resources and all of the power didn't care about human beings. They didn't care that they were feeding us into the maw of a generational epidemic. And if you take a look at what's occurring right now, this truth is now announcing itself. And people are becoming more radicalized, which, again, I'm hopeful about because we have to become radicalized in the face of a radicalized antagonist. So all of this is becoming more and more clear with every passing hour, which means that they're not able to control the narrative anymore. No, we're talking right now. I don't know how you feel about it. I look at like my podcast or my Substack or whatever it is, and it outranks what most corporate media is doing.
Yeah.
That's a really hopeful sign because nobody believes the official capitalist line anymore. They know that this is BS. They feel it, they live it, and as a result, there's no PR around this. There's no way to spin this. And every expression of it, it just makes that revolutionary potential grow and grow.
The corporate media has dropped the ball. They don't know how to cover this. They don't know what questions to ask. I mean, it's so painful when he goes on Meet the Press because, you know, this is a great opportunity to hold this guy to account. And it's so performative, all of it. In fact, you may have seen that moment on the last one, just to digress for a second, where the rain was pouring down on the roof of this farm building where they were holding the interview. And in the moments that they kind of stopped recording and Kristen Welker kind of leaned forward, she spoke in her normal voice to ask if we should stop or carry on. And then she leaned back and went into her fake performative voice again to continue the interview. You know, and we watched that. And I think that this inauthenticity presents itself not just in the media, but also Trump's speech on the National Mall was so performative, was so fake, wheeling out veterans and spending a few seconds saying, we love you, you're a very powerful person, just weird language. And then literally ushing them off the stage, shooing them off the stage so he could be the star again. Very weird behavior. And I'm just convinced that this period of inauthenticity that is, it's so acute compared to what people like us and our colleagues are doing in the independent media space, where, you know, we don't have to be here. We choose to be here. And I think that this is the difference. And that's why you're seeing democratic socialists being elected for in primaries and to Congress and to the mayor of New York. There is a shift. And it feels quite good.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I always think about this, Anthony. I always sort of relate this back to the experience of almost my Sid Arthe experience of being in academia. You look at like a college president or an administrator and you're like, wow, what a powerful person. And then you're in a meeting with them and you listen to them talk and you're like, oh, okay. These people aren't that smart. These people aren't all that talented. They've gotten to where they are because they've played a game. They've shown a willingness to hurt people, which I actually think is one of the more revealing things that we've seen over the past couple of years and months, where we see all of these people who were supposedly, whether liberal or resistance or whatever, they're either in the Epstein files or they're going to Peter Thiel's secret, discourse. And then the next week we see a column from them like sane-washing fascist, anti-trans, anti-democratic ideas. And we start to realize, oh, this is very much a performance. And it's not just on the right. It's not just in corporate media, which, by the way, is unwatchable at this point. Because not only is it a soap opera, but it's not reporting the experience that people are having. And so as a result, the more that you're in it and the more that politics affect you, the more that you have an understanding of what's going on. You might not have gone to the right schools. You might not have worked in politics for years, but you yourself are an expert because you are a subject within it. And when we're talking about politicians, you brought up the Democratic Socialist. Why are people voting for young people who have never held office before? They're voting for them not just because they're addressing material conditions. Like, do not underestimate the power of actually, making people's lives better. Right. But on top of that, there's a neoliberal technocratic class. And they have had control of the Democratic Party and previously the Republican Party for decades. And what were we given, Anthony? We were given one pep rally after another with carefully chosen music and optics. And meanwhile, it was the equivalent of a middle manager saying, hey, I know things have been tough. Let's have a pizza party this Friday. Yeah. And that's all that it is. Yeah. And after years of pizza parties and being told, hey, I know things are a little tough right now. I promise we'll make things better soon. Eventually people say, I'm tired. Like, I'm exhausted. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm expecting something different. There are natural cycles to this. And you can only lie to people and you can only gaslight people for so long. And history shows us that there are cycles of this. There are periods in which people are like, fine, I'll accept whatever you can give me. And eventually they're like, no, I'm going to knock the gates down. You're not going to be able to continue selling me this fantasy. My lived experience is in complete antithesis to this. And that's where we are at this point, which is one of the reasons, again, why I think that we're enjoying a historical moment of possible change.
This is why Trump and MAGA are ramping up the accusations of communism. Yep. And socialism and all the isms that they could never define. Because they're on the ropes. They're scared. And I think part of the reason they're scared is because with Mamdani in New York, for example, he's put his money where his mouth is. He's shifted the budget around and proved that you can do all of these things. That it's really been a fallacy since forever that things like childcare can't be paid for. There is the money to do these things. It's just the will that has been missing. And so he's willing, as he said in an interview with Jonathan Karl, he's willing to be the poster child for this kind of criticism of socialism or, they call it communism. Of course, it's nothing of the sort. But because the proof of the pudding is in the tasting, and it's actually happening. And the evidence is there. Judge me by my actions, he says. So do you think that, because, we sense, and I've written a lot and done programs this week about the fact that this propaganda about communism is going to be everything that Trump and his people focus on leading into the midterms. Is it because they know that these candidates and the mayor and these congressional candidates are actually far smarter, far more capable, and just have the ability to be authentic in their offering, and that's something that MAGA doesn't possess?
Yeah, I want to start answering this because it's an excellent question that I don't think enough people are wrestling with. I want to start in 2016 when Donald Trump originally won the presidency. And, obviously it was racism, it was sexism, it was xenophobia, it was an authoritarian spirit. But the secret at the heart of it, Anthony, was that Donald Trump was making, he didn't mean it. He was making a faux leftist argument underneath all of that, which was, and people might not remember this, he said people got screwed by free trade and global capitalism, and something needed to be done. They had been betrayed by the financial elites. And by the way, if you remember, he said both parties did it, which, by the way, was welcoming people into a new paradigm. Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, all of these, Nick Fuentes for that matter, all of these far-right personalities, they have a secret weapon, which is something, by the way, that they learned from the National Socialist Party. There's a reason why socialist is part of the Nazi name, is because the far right understands that when there is not a leftist critique of capitalism being made in a time of decline and in a time of material conditions getting worse, they can make a fake leftist argument, which says that capitalism has betrayed us, it's hurting people, and somebody needs to do something about it. The Democratic Party has become a conservative party. You'll notice that all of the arguments that the status quo Democratic Party makes is about helping the middle class. It's not about expanding protections. It's not about addressing material conditions. It's about making it sure that what remains doesn't get destroyed, right? There's no ambitious agenda. And I say this all the time, which is, if you don't believe what I'm talking about, ask what is the big project that the Democratic Party is proposing? What is the step forward? And by the way, Joe Biden, to give him credit, even though I have tons of critiques, he had an idea for where things should go. And I want to remind people, he didn't get that voted down by the Republican Party. He had it voted down by the Democratic Party, particularly yes. 2 Democratic senators, and there would have been more if they needed more.
Yeah.
So what has occurred here is that the Democratic Party has moved to be a conservative party, which allows its left flank to be open. The Republican Party and the fascists, they naturally make a critique of capitalism. People hear it and they say, oh, finally, somebody's saying something about this. So what occurs is the Republican Party, and by the way, the Democratic Party is freaking out about the leftist as well.
I know.
They're freaking out because they've been in a game in which they knew they could win. The left flank was open. And if you don't believe me, go watch anything Tucker Carlson says. And you'll hear people, they'll say, oh my God, Tucker Carlson's suddenly making sense. No. He's lying to you. He's making a faux leftist capitalist critique, which is what, the far right has always done. So now that you have actual people who are actually on the left making a leftist critique of capitalism, it's an existential crisis. So it has to be framed as communism. And by the way, you're going to see both the status quo of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party fight harder than they've ever fought against one another. Because now that there's an actual leftist alternative, they close ranks and they more or less fight together, which you brought up Mondani. I need to remind people that Andrew Cuomo was endorsed by both Donald Trump and leaders of the Democratic Party. Yes. That was a perfect metaphor for how this takes place. And again, I'm not just making this up. This is how history works. This is how it always comes into formation. And what we're seeing right now is a very predictable and very understandable pattern.
Follow the money is the phrase that springs to mind. I mean, the Democratic Party could do itself a favor by pronouncing that it's not taking any more corporate donor money or not listening to lobbyists, and actually doing a kind of step change to take America to a place that it hasn't been in an awfully long time. But they're not going to do that. That's left to the not even fringe anymore, but AOC is very proudly doesn't take these financial gifts, and people trust her because of that. And Mamdani the same. And so what was formerly described as like the squad is growing in number. And we're hearing less and less from Schumer and Jeffries. They're getting less airtime. They don't seem to be able to cut through like they did before this groundswell. But, if it's happening by osmosis because it's necessary, and we're seeing this resistance that is working. Trump is the danger, but the resistance is, this is like a kind of classic movie, isn't it? That we're seeing this kind of cavalry coming from over the hill, but it doesn't look like the traditional Democratic Party. This could be very interesting, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And this is the stress test that I've been predicting within the Democratic Party for the past few years. It was always going to happen. And I want to give a quick example of this. Anthony, I'm sure you know this, but public approval of AI and data centers is somewhere in the air. It's basically equal to Ebola. Right? The approval of it.
Yes.
So this is an issue. 80% of Americans, and by the way, Anthony, it's funny, even conservatives oppose this. This is like one of those issues that cuts across all party lines.
Yeah.
People don't want data centers to be built, and they especially don't want them to be built in their towns.
Right.
So what does the Democratic Party do? We're told, by the way, the Democratic Party always moves towards the center or the right because they're worried about winning elections. But what's their plan? Is it to oppose data centers? No, it's not. Hakeem Jeffries, he announces, the Democratic position is we're going to make sure that as these data centers are being built, that we're going to make sure that your electric rates don't go up. So then you have to ask a question, and we get to actual deep politics. Why is it the Democratic Party doesn't harness this popular discontent? Why do they not take on this supermajority? And the reason is because they're taking money from the same tech billionaires and same tech corporations as the Republican Party. They bought both sides of the aisle. Add on to that the fact that the strategist of the Democratic Party, the strategists, the consultants, all of these people, people are like, well, they're running campaigns. No, that's their part-time gig. If they're not running a campaign, what are they doing for money? They're on the boards of the corporations that pay them way more than any campaign pays them. So when they run a campaign, they're not going to trouble the people who are paying them millions of dollars. They're going to create an agenda that doesn't stress this out. And you'll notice, I don't know if you saw this, they rolled out their Project 2029 if they win the presidency in Congress. And you read through it, and all of the positions, you can almost feel the corporations that were in the room with them as they were creating this thing.
Yes.
There's no ambitious agenda because they're being paid not to be ambitious.
Well, even the title of the document is so offensive.
Yes. And then on top of that, this frustration with the leftist, what is actually occurring right now, and we can go into very, very recent history. If people don't remember this, in 2008, when Barack Obama upset Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination, the Clinton machine was in charge of the Democratic Party. They were the ones that made the partnerships. They were the ones that chose the candidates. They were the ones that chose, the position in the agenda. And the Clinton machine, for the record, was centrist at best and worked with all these corporations. And by the way, there's a reason why we have all these corporate monoliths and monopolies now. It's because Clinton deregulated it and allowed telecommunications to come together and the beginning of what would eventually be the tech oligarchical class. Obama wrestled away control of the Democratic Party. And more or less, the people who were close to him, they made new partnerships. And by the way, Anthony, they made new partnerships with Google, with Apple, with Elon Musk. They made sure that none of that was regulated. They flushed them with billions of dollars in government contracts. Now we've reached a new point. Parties don't change naturally. They don't just change based on primaries and elections. There's too much money on the line. There's too much influence. There's too much power. So when there is an insurgency that takes place outside of the party, it's almost like white blood cells trying to protect a body. They're trying to flush it out as quickly as possible. And it doesn't mean that there's a giant conspiracy, although there are conspiracies within all of this. This is the actual incentives that create politics. And people need to really figure out how politics work, as opposed to, going back to the corporate media, this weird pageantry of characters and storylines and soap opera things. It's actually about who controls the purse strings, who controls the partnerships. And there's a reason why the Democratic Party doesn't fight the way it's supposed to. It's because it's more or less controlled and bankrolled by the same people who are controlling and bankrolling the Republican Party at the same time.
And Trump knows this.
Yes.
And that's why he's pushing this communist propaganda, because he knows that it could split the Democrats and that it infuriates the establishment Democrats. And so he's pushing their buttons. and he's looking to create a rift. Do you think that? I mean, it's hard to credit Trump with any strategy, but I'm sure that this is what he's been told to say, and he's very happy with that, and will run with it because he's always talked in this way. But based upon what you're saying, the silence from the establishment Democrats is very telling.
Absolutely. And more or less, I try and explain to people, it's like watching the Harlem Globetrotters play the Washington Generals. Every now and then the Washington Generals will steal a game from the Harlem Globetrotters. But a lot of the time they're just watching the Globetrotters spin a ball on their finger and throw confetti at the crowd.
Right.
And more or less what has happened here. And it's hard to understand, I think, for some people, because it's completely counter to the political narrative that people have been fed for forever, right? What is actually occurring here is that you have two parties. It's not a uniparty, but it is a group of people who are more or less PR flacks for the wealthy and the oligarchical classes.
Yes.
The Democratic Party isn't going behind the scenes and they're like, we're going to do this and you're going to do that. It's just the way the incentives play out. And right now we're in this weird position, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but I think it's important. People aren't really wrestling with the fact that the middle class in the United States of America is being liquidated. Mm-hmm. These people are losing their jobs. I'm sure people have seen or know people who lost white collar jobs and they're suddenly going into the service sector, or, right. They're driving Uber Eats or DoorDash.
Yes.
So this liquidation, it's necessary for people like Elon Musk to become a trillionaire and for a Bezos to become a trillionaire. It's the next step in the process. And we've seen these oligarchs who have taken over politics. So what is occurring is actually a generational shift. The Democratic Party, they have a couple of bases. They've got their corporate, billionaire benefactors who sort of guide policy. Then they've got the middle class underneath them. Some people refer to it as the professional managerial class. Those people are losing their jobs. Those people do not have the same living conditions or material conditions. The working class was more or less ceded to the Republican Party, and those people, they're not just, working class, they're now impoverished. They're now unable to even pay for rent. They're unable to pay for food. They're not able to pay for gas. So what's occurring right now is something throughout American history. You look as these classes change and as their conditions change, it changes the entire game board. It's not, people want to return to 2016. 2016 is gone. Yeah. There is no reality that looks like that anymore. And on top of that, you can't return to it because it would just get us back here. Something is fundamentally going to change at this point.
I'll take 2008 at this stage, or 2012. I get a sense, though, that, people listening to us might be like, so how do we help these left-leaning candidates either infiltrate the establishment Democrat class and have success that way? Because I've always, my position has not changed. I've always said that the Democrats need to lean further into the left and not shy away from it. And we're starting to see that happen naturally. But when it comes to the vote with a two-party system, it is very difficult. As you said, the country has, or the politics has relied on this two-party system to enrich itself. So what you're really describing is a third party, potentially, and we're hearing, there has been talk of that on the right. But it is problematic because if Democrats know that corruption exists on the left too, then are they more likely to just not vote? And turnout is going to be the only way to defeat Trumpism in the upcoming elections.
I mean, the question you ask, I think, is the question of the time. And I want to start because we're talking about votes, we're talking about Congress, we're talking about the presidency. And that feels so far away from us. You and I, we both have votes whenever these elections come around. We can vote once in a November, every other November, every 4 Novembers, whatever it is. What actually needs to occur is something that we've seen in this country over and over again, is where people lose faith in a national system and they start to rebel against it. It begins local, and more importantly, it becomes internally. which is that people need to reform communities. We've been alienated by capitalism. We've been isolated by capitalism. What we're seeing in response to things like ICE raids and murders is we're starting to see communities that say, you know what, our mayor, who is a Democrat, isn't taking care of us. Our governor, who is a Democrat, isn't taking care of us. We have to take care of each other. And quite frankly, what we need to do, it depends on solidarity, because the capitalism has put us in such a precarious position. Anthony, quite frankly, what we need in this country is we need a national strike. We need collective action that brings this system to its knees. But how do you do that when you can't miss a day of work to even go to the doctor?
Yeah.
Right? How do you walk out of your job not knowing how to pay groceries, whether or not you're going to be thrown out of your house, whether or not you're not
going to... It's been engineered that way to prevent a national strike. Yeah.
It's been engineered that way.
Yeah.
But eventually through relationships and through trust, we can create a system. I want to tell a quick story, Anthony. My grandmother in rural Indiana was part of an extremely impoverished family during the Great Depression. I'm talking about the type of, when we talk about the Great Depression, we talk about people losing their jobs. We're talking about people living and nearly starving. Right? Yeah. And what eventually happened during the Great Depression is that a sheriff would come with the bank and would throw a family out of the house. And you know, eventually what people did, they waited until the sheriff left and then they moved the people back in the house. And then they did it over and over again until eventually the entire neighborhood was in front of the house saying, you're not throwing these people out anymore. Right? They would feed each other. They would protect each other. That type of solidarity on a communal level is what's necessary right now. Get people in your communities elected who are going to actually represent you, and then it ripples upwards. But there's one extra part of this that I want people to take away from this, because it sounds simple, but it's not. We have to change our own emotional and personal relationships with politics. What are you seeing already? For 2028, people are already saying, oh, I don't really support this politician, but I'll vote for them. Why are you going ahead and negotiating with yourself? You deserve better than non-representation. You deserve better than scraps. But there's an internalized self-regulator that keeps us from expecting better. And I want to point to New York City again, Anthony, because all of a sudden, what are you seeing in this major metropolitan area? People are looking around, they're saying, oh, politicians can do things for us? They can actually, like, instead of having a mayor who scolds us and takes money from Turkey and helps corporations, they'll actually fight on our behalf. That's what you have to expect everywhere. And the Democratic Party has been plagued by people who have been settling all of these years and telling themselves a story that has nothing to do with their actual reality.
And it's a culture shock, isn't it? Because in other countries, successful, smaller, admittedly European countries, where they have a social democracy that functions with high taxes and excellent public services and socialized medicine and everything, people are so used to it just working. And so then people can stop worrying about who to vote for, and they can spend more time actually talking to people and enjoying their lives and their families. I wrote a Substack on Tuesday that the subtitle of which was Trump conflates communism with community, or community with communism. And I think that this is kind of the point that you're making, is that actually what he might describe as communism is that sense of community and even government working with community. It's like the kind of kibbutz model. It does work. It's not expensive. Everybody benefits. And we're so far gone from that. And yet, this is what Mamdani is educating people about. And it's working.
I couldn't agree more. Because and if you actually read the original neoliberals, this is a group, by the way, that started forming in the 20th century. And by the way, they formed in response to fascism and communism and democracy, for that matter. They saw all of them as being incredibly dangerous. And the best thing that they could do was isolate and alienate us to keep us from having conversations with one another. And that sort of building of community is absolutely essential for a working country and a working world for that matter. We're supposed to see each other as enemies. And what does Donald Trump represent? He represents the inline of sociopathic capitalism. I'm going to screw everybody. And by the way, I'm not even going to be close to the people around me. This is a man who openly hates his own children. Right? He sees them as competitors. He sort of is disgusted by them. Yes. Elon Musk is the exact same way. So what we've been granted is a cautionary tale, which is these people have all the money and all the power in the world. And Anthony, they're miserable. Yeah. What we're dealing with right now is not just a democratic crisis. It's not just an economic crisis. It's a spiritual crisis. And what are we seeing right now? I'm seeing so many hopeful things. I'm seeing people who are saying, you know what? Social media doesn't do it for me anymore. It feels bad. Why does it feel so bad? Yeah. Suddenly you're starting to see people, and I don't even know that they're aware of it. They're like, you know what? Like, I kind of like gardening. I like learning how to make things. I want to have a community. I want to join a club. I want to meet with my neighbors and talk about what's going on. You know, I had a conversation with my neighbor a couple of months ago in which we were talking about what's going on and how we could take care of each other. And all of us were like, why haven't we done this before? You know, and there's something growing in that, because political movements and political change and revolution, they don't just erupt out of nowhere. They become inevitable, but for a long time, they bubble up. Right? Even the founding of the United States of America, it began with a slow, roiling anger at, colonization and lack of representation. I think people are desperate for that. And I think we've finally looked around and we've said, what have we been doing all of this for? Mm-hmm. And it's helpful that we've basically, what was the original deal of the American dream? You were going to be able to advance. You were going to make more money. Your kids were going to have a better future. You could buy a house. You could have the car. You could do all that. Now, none of that is attainable. We know our kids aren't going to have a better financial future if things keep going. We can't even buy a house at this point. You can't even afford groceries. So even that sort of carrot on the end of the stick is falling by the wayside, which leaves us saying, why are we doing this? It is an awakening clarity. We're hitting rock bottom, which allows us to see that, oh my God, we've been lied to our entire lives. What have I been doing this for? Which makes the potential for change grow.
And that's why Trump repainting this plane leaves such a bad taste in people's mouths. And it's very interesting because the only person that seems to be getting any joy from that is him. And yet, as you say, he is still miserable. Yep. So even after $1 billion plane, which he thought would make him happy, gives him no pleasure at all. I feel like this turning point could not come soon enough because the midterms are only 4 months away. It's going to come around very fast. And some of the language we've been hearing Trump use in the last week about elections, and if you can't win, then you can't cheat, and all this weird stuff suggests to me that November 2028 is going to be an absolute fire pit of drama, and it might be the thing that dislodges this agonizing two-party system and the neoliberalism that you've been describing in your work for so long. So how do people go forward in the short term? Because they've got to vote in the midterms. This is so important. I've said a few times on the show I was very disappointed at the turnout in the primaries. I would have thought that rising fascism might be a reason for people to actually want to get out and vote, but it didn't really play out that way, and many races were far too tight. And we've had some crazy Supreme Court decisions of late, and it really does feel at times quite futile. But engagement is everything, isn't it? Not just in the polling place, but through community and communication and door knocking and telling people that there is an alternative to Trumpism/fascism.
Absolutely. And I would say when it comes to the midterms for 2028, I hope the people watching and listening, they feel it within themselves. You can't just wait for these landmarks. Everything changes constantly day to day and week to week and month to month. And you cannot gift authoritarians and fascists time. That's one of the few things you cannot afford to do. And by the way, we talk about these midterms. We talk about whether or not this is going to happen. Trump has made it clear, and everyone around him has made it clear, that they're trying to figure out how to either rig the election or not seat people who win. And every single day that passes, and by the way, this is not just the Republican Party, as popular discontent grows and as a small d Democratic movement grows, you're seeing both parties try and figure out how to control a situation that they've lost control out of. The Republicans are working with the tech fascists to, create a system of surveillance and control. We saw the 250th anniversary gave us a chilling example of this around the reflecting pool, where we had AI surveillance put up in order to keep track of his cesspool, yes. Right? That's not just going to be there. That's going to be widespread. In fact, today we even learned, as we're recording this, we even learned that there is an AI surveillance movement trying to find critics of ICE. And yes. What are they doing, Anthony? If somebody protests against ICE, they're getting 30 years. They're getting 50 years for having protest literature.
That's right.
Meanwhile, what's the Democratic Party floating? They think the reason that they've lost support is because of social media, kids on TikTok. So what are we now floating? We're going to have internet censorship. We're going to ban children and by the way, I think children probably shouldn't be on social media, but I don't trust them to be the vehicle that creates it. This just happened, by the way, in Great Britain as well, in the disastrous prime minister of Keir Starmer. And Labour, which, by the way, gave us a very good clue of where the Democratic Party is going. So while popular discontent and a small d Democratic movement is being created, we have to work with each other in order to create this solidarity that can withstand the punches that are coming. This is more than elections. And yes, absolutely, you should vote against this. But you can't just look at representative government and these institutions that have all been corrupted and expect those to fix things for you. This, unfortunately, is one of those moments that you and I and everyone watching is going to have to realize we have skin in the game. We have to put our thumbs on the scale. We have to be involved in this, because when it comes to democracy, voting is only the beginning of it. That is just the minimum amount of activity you can put into democracy. We have to organize, we have to take care of each other, and we have to start building bonds together, because unfortunately a fight is coming. And that fight's going to be even worse than what we've seen already.
Our platform and the platform of independent news creators and thinkers is social media. YouTube is social media. And so maybe it would be healthy for people to stop doom scrolling, that kind of repetitive strain injury caused by Instagram Reels and TikTok, and actually do what we do and create a political space in their social feed for themselves and their own messaging. And that the time that people waste doom scrolling can actually be put to much better use, communicating with their little ecosystem. We all have our algorithm and our people, and reaching our people with this messaging, even if it is going to cause family rifts. The cause is far more important in the long term.
This is one of the biggest issues that nobody is actually talking about, which is the oligarchs have created a system of social media that is, quite frankly, an addictive drug. Yeah. All of it is based on psychological manipulation, and it's torn apart the fabric of this country. That being said, it's one of the few available tools that we have. So what we have to do is we have to evaluate how we use it. And one thing, in the middle of a revolutionary struggle, you have to take care of yourself. You need to go out. You need to talk to people. You need to touch grass, to borrow an internet phrase, right? You need to find the simple things that don't cost you anything, that fill you back up and replenish you and give you joy and hope. At the same time, I would offer one thing which I think not a lot of people are talking about, and they need to. In this moment, people need to evaluate what it is they're looking at and listening to and what they're watching, and ask themselves, why am I doing this? There are so many commentators and influencers and supposed journalists who are simply telling people what they want to hear. There's a liberal version of the MAGA, echo chamber out there. Oh, don't worry, Robert Mueller's going to take care of this. Jack Smith's got it under control. Oh, don't listen to critiques of the Democratic Party. And by the way, weirdly enough, Anthony, most of the people saying that are former Republicans or people who have been convicted of crimes with Donald Trump or his family members, for that matter.
Yes, and have found new careers in the media.
It's weird, isn't it, how that occurred? It's a bunch of cast-off Republicans who are now trying to control liberals and progressives.
Right.
So there needs to be an evaluation, much like somebody who decides maybe drinking isn't right for me, maybe using drugs, maybe smoking, maybe all of these things. Why are you doing what you're doing? And is it helping you or is it hindering you? And we have to start pushing away from catharsis and become uncomfortable and also decide what it is that we want. This is a time of choosing. It's a time of discovering who we are. It's a time of discovering who it is that we want to be.
And boycotting brands and putting, your money where your mouth is. I mean, we boycott Target for a very long time, and it ended up with the CEO stepping down over DEI. I mean, you can affect change, and it would be foolish to think that you can't. Listen, I'm so grateful to you. I'm pleased that you and I have been able to kind of celebrate this positive shift in this moment, because I do think people are feeling it. And what's important is that we harness this feeling, and we just don't let it slide, and let this 250th anniversary be the algae in the reflecting pool. Let that be the kind of the memory of how Donald Trump was able to bring the country together. Okay, I'm grateful to you. I look forward to our next conversation. But for now, Jared Yates Sexton, thanks for joining The Weekend Show.
Thank you, Anthony.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism on Substack at The Anthony Davis. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.